If a totally disastrous life brings you to a point of awakening, now, retrospectively, suddenly, it fulfilled a purpose. Suffering in your life. If it still arises, use it so that the ego gets burned up by the suffering. So to speak, the ego gets burned up in this fire of suffering. Now we can call this conscious suffering. It's a very interesting concept. Conscious suffering, when suffering arises, become aware of it, and accept that it's there, in the form of fear, anxiety, regret, a self-pity, an unhappy sense of self, or complaining. All your life, many forms of suffering, you've lost things. You don't know things you had identified with. Taken away from you. Who am I now? I'm nobody. I'm nobody. Well, that's great. Be nobody more completely. Realize fully you're a nobody. Mess, haha. I don't know who I am anymore. I've lost everything. All the things I've worked for are probably gone. Everything is so pointless. But, as your mind is still talking, it's all been for nothing. It's all meaningless. Meaningless. This is your mind talking. Don't believe in the things it says. But it continues talking. Many humans in this world are suffering from what we could call nihilism. I don't know if you know that word, nihilism. Nihilism means the belief that everything is absolutely and utterly pointless. That's a deep form of suffering. Nihilism doesn't just mean, what's the point of it all? It's not just this awful life of mine that is pointless. The whole world is pointless. It's so awful. And that's very deep suffering, the total lack of meaning. Everything is arbitrary and random. Meaninglessness is a mental disease that is inflicting millions of humans. It's because everybody, the mainstream culture, still believes in it. It goes back to the 19th century. It goes back to Darwin's Origin of Species. Darwin said life evolved, which undoubtedly is true. But he said life evolved as an arbitrary, random course of events, molecules and atoms at random, coming together and forming life forms over millions of years. Random. The idea of randomness in the theory of evolution, put forward by Darwin and others, means there's no purpose or intelligence behind it whatsoever. It's a random process. In other words, it's the belief that all life on this planet has no meaning. It just is a meaningless conglomeration of atoms and molecules. It's ultimately meaningless. That, basically, is the underlying assumption behind the theory of evolution that many people still believe. And it is saved into mainstream culture. And even people who have never even heard of Darwin have it saved into their belief system. That we live in a meaningless universe. Before that happened, we had certain religious beliefs. So, there was some meaning. And although a lot of that, perhaps, was ideological and ego-driven, nevertheless, in the ancient religions, there was access to the transcendent. Here and there were still little openings into the transcendent, even though many forms of religion developed into ideological belief systems that strengthened the ego. Nevertheless, religion still carried, or still carries, the secret of transcendence, hiding within the religions. That became inaccessible to many humans. So now, we have the pandemic of nihilism. This is one of the pandemics far worse than any physical pandemic. The belief that everything is meaningless. And you can have a meaning in your life that is very limited. For many people, the meaning is, okay, I want to have a career. That gives you limited meaning in your personal life. I'm working for a career. Nothing wrong with that. I'm working to create a better life for myself and my family. That's also wonderful and great. I'm working to achieve recognition in this world, etc., etc. That's fine too. But at some point, meaning that is purely personal may begin to lose its power. Let's say you've spent 2 or 3 decades working on your career, which is fine. At some point, you may arrive at a place where your career doesn't mean anything anymore, or you lose it. You lose your career and your status, or it consumes you so completely that you become ill with stress, or in some other way, it turns into something that's not satisfying at all. It actually creates suffering. Something can give you limited meaning for a while, for years, and then suddenly turn out to be ultimately meaningless. Some people suddenly wake up and think, my whole life. Some people fall seriously ill, and then they look back on their life and see, This was so pointless, accumulating possessions. Why did I do that? What was the point of it? All the things I was so anxious about when now there's... Let's say I'm seriously ill now. All the things I was so anxious about that they created. What was that? All the things they've been striving for will ultimately seem pointless. That can be an opening. Suddenly, wow, the limited personal meaning, which was fine. It's better than no meaning at all, can open the door to a deeper realization. To have a personal meaning in your life is better than no meaning at all. But ultimately, that's not satisfying in the long term. You have to go deeper to a deeper meaning that transcends who you are as a person. And that is, am I aligned with the purpose of the universe? That is the ultimate true meaning. Am I aligned with the purpose? And what is the purpose of the universe? The purpose of the universe is consciousness, bringing more consciousness into this dimension. That's the purpose of the universe, bringing more consciousness into this dimension. Am I aligned with that? If that is the case, if you are aligned with that, you are a bringer of consciousness, a bringer of light. That is the ultimate, true purpose. It could be that your personal purpose and the deeper purpose can go together. That's fine. You can have a career, and yet it's not totally ego-dominated. While you are active, working, you bring in the light of consciousness. You do things in your work that bring more consciousness into this dimension. That's wonderful. So you can have it. It's not necessarily a case of either having a career or being aligned with the universal purpose. You can bring the two together. That's perfectly fine. That's the balance between being and doing, as I sometimes call it, the balance between being and doing. Bringing those two together. But the purpose, there's only one true purpose in your life, and that you have to discover. That is, am I aligned with consciousness? Am I a bringer of consciousness? So that's the end of nihilism. At that point, it no longer matters. Your entire past becomes relatively unimportant when you realize the meaning of life is to be a bringer of consciousness. Let's say your entire past was one disaster after another. Unfortunately, for some people, life is like that. Let's say you ended up in prison because you did one wrong and bad thing after another. You look back on your so-called life and think, my God, that was a disaster. My entire life was just a disaster. Okay. But at this moment you realize the consciousness that you are. All the suffering you have created for yourself and others, all the suffering was part of the egoic dream, the delusion, the egoic delusion, and the conditioning that you came into this world with. Then you awaken at this moment. If a totally disastrous life brings you to a point of awakening, the whole thing was great, because it suddenly has a purpose retrospectively. All the disasters brought you to this moment of awakening. So, in retrospect, what was totally absurd and meaningless suddenly fulfilled a purpose. The past can suddenly be realized as having fulfilled its purpose by creating the suffering that led to your awakening. Ha, tahi. There's no regret anymore about the past. It all made sense. Meaning arises retrospectively. It only remains absurd and disastrous if the awakening doesn't happen. Then you're trapped in the dreadful dream, continuing to be trapped in it. Wow. So, be aligned with universal purpose. That is the ultimate birth. No matter what you do, no matter how it expresses itself through you, that doesn't matter. But realize this. If you want to look at your life in terms of failure and success, as many people do, you might ask, is my life a failure? Is my life a success? How do you determine that? What criterion do you use for failure or success? Do you allow this world to tell you whether you're a failure or a success? To a large extent, this world is insane. So, are you allowing an insane world to tell you whether your life is a failure or a success? Ha, 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 ha. Well now, if this world cannot tell you, then what? Obviously, the only true criterion is whether you are conscious or not in this moment, purely conscious in this moment, instead of being totally immersed in the dream of your conditioned awareness, the fictitious person. If you are conscious in this moment, then that is the greatest and only true success that could exist in this life. Your entire past becomes irrelevant. If it has taken you to this point in that sense, it is relevant, but ultimately, it's irrelevant. You're awake in this moment. You represent the awakened state of consciousness in humanity. Oh, wow. That's success. Nothing else is success. Even if you want to use the term success, I'd probably recommend avoiding it. Because that would imply there's somebody there saying, I have achieved consciousness. Again, you'd create another conceptual identity in your mind. Another form of ego that says, I am conscious, unlike all these other people who are not conscious. I have achieved something. I have achieved awakening. That's a delusion again. The I that claims to have achieved awakening is the ego again, an ego that claims some kind of achievement. True meaning can only arise when the ego subsides, when it becomes transparent, and awakening happens. But it's not an achievement. There's nobody there to have achieved anything. It's something that happens through you. The ego in some way created it in a negative sense, because the ego created the suffering that led to the awakening. In that sense, perhaps, the ego did achieve it. But ultimately to claim, I have achieved awakening, is an ego delusion. So, nihilism is a disease. It's a form of suffering that can lead to awakening. But it can also lead to despair, suicide, or bitterness. It may even lead to drug use and attempt to desensitize oneself against the suffering of meaninglessness. This epidemic of drug addiction we see today often stems from this root, cause a desperate attempt to escape the unbearable weight of meaninglessness. There's a very urgent need for the awakening of humanity. There's a great urgency now, because we are moving into a collectively critical situation on this planet. Awakening is absolutely necessary. Nobody awakens in their comfort zone. Nobody awakens when the conditions are what your mind might call optimum conditions for awakening. Nothing disturbs me. I get peace and quiet around me. I'm particularly wealthy. No challenges distract me from my meditation periods. Excellent food. Everything is pure and clean. 2 massages every day with essential oils. Fantastic conditions for spiritual awakening. Let's say you're in a spa where you pay $2,000 per day. You've won the lottery, so you go to this spa. These are ideal conditions for awakening. Would you awaken there? You might become very peaceful. It would be very pleasant. But you'd be like a plant growing in a protected environment, a greenhouse with just the right temperature. The plant grows quickly, blossoms, but is weak. The moment it's put outside, it would collapse. It hasn't developed the inner strength to exist in the real world. For awakening, the challenges you experience in your daily life now are your best tools. They are the optimum way of awakening. Use the challenges you're facing in daily life. Don't believe, if I could only find an ideal situation, then I would easily awaken spiritually. No, you wouldn't. After some initial pleasant experiences in your imaginary spa, your level of consciousness would actually decrease. Gradually, you'd go back to sleep. The comfort would lull you to sleep. Presence only rises when it's necessary. Nothing comes unless it's needed. There needs to be a call for it. There needs to be a gap between the current situation and what is needed to remedy it. Things need to be difficult. Otherwise, change doesn't happen. Most of the time, there is a voice in your head that comments and has opinions, viewpoints, and interpretations about what's going on in your life. I call that the voice in the head. For most humans, that is completely involuntary. They don't even know that they have a voice in the head that never stops talking, most of the time silently in your head. At other times, it may even shout something out so it wants to be heard. If you walk in the street, you will find most people look fairly sane. They're not talking to themselves, it seems, because they're not talking out aloud. But if you listened into everybody's head, you would be amazed at how noisy the inside of every human is. It's like a radio, you know, these radio stations where the people talk in an excited voice, and they go on and on. If you go to a foreign country and you don't know what they're talking about, you might think, this must be extremely important. But if you can understand what they are saying, you realize it's completely meaningless. It's just noise. So, a significant part of what happens in your mind, the larger part, is actually just superfluous noise. Thinking is a wonderful ability, a wonderful tool, if used rightly. It is an instrument that causes dysfunction and misery for millions on the planet, unhappiness for millions if thinking is not used, but instead uses you. When humans say, I think, in most cases, that's actually not true because they have no control over their thinking. It's compulsive and involuntary. They are so identified with these thought processes that they don't even know they are in the grip of them. Because they are so identified, they become their thought processes. So, whatever comes into your head, you completely believe in it. And then you think, yeah, that's how it is. Leon just mentioned, I don't know, we were talking this morning about yesterday, about when I was struggling to survive on a physical plane. I often ate baked beans on toast. I was living in England. There's a little bit of relevance here too. That could have been a very unhappy period in my life, not knowing what to live on the next day or the day after. Now I'm able to have good meals occasionally, and I haven't had baked beans on toast in a long time now. But Leon gave me a can yesterday. When I was reduced to eating baked beans on toast, and again, that's a wrong way of putting it. It could have been very unhappy. I was already in my 30s. My mind, my mental commentary, the involuntary thought processes would normally have said, this is your complete failure. You can't afford the rent. You don't know. You have no income. You've made a mess out of your life, and this is what you've been reduced to: baked beans on toast. Look at your contemporaries. They're driving around in their BMWs. They've got all that, and this is what life has done to me, or what I have done to mess up my life. I could have had many kinds of narratives accompanying what was happening in the present moment that would have created unhappiness, and I wouldn't even have known it. That happens. This is just a small example of how a narrative that you have, that accompanies something you are doing, causes unhappiness. You can do the same thing without the narrative, and you're free of unhappiness. You're eating baked beans on toast, and actually, it doesn't taste that bad at all. You swallow, and it is nourishing. You don't even have to say that. You can simply enjoy the sensory perceptions associated with it without building a sense of self around it. The sense of self that you build arises through involuntary and compulsive thinking. Me and the Buddha were already talking about that. I'm saying this now in case you need to leave early or want to go across the street. If you only take this away from this evening, but hopefully there will be much more whenever you feel unhappiness. This is a generic term. Unhappiness in whatever form. Unhappiness can arise as irritation, anger, or even boredom. Sadness, all kinds of states that don't feel pleasant are unhappiness. Usually, they are attributed to a life situation, something that's going on in your life. For example, waiting at the airline counter. Of course, how often things don't go well there. Let's hope they don't drag you out of the plane, but that could happen too. Whenever you feel irritation, anger, or upset in whatever form, ask yourself, is this caused by the situation, or is it caused by what my mind is telling me about the situation? In 95% of cases, you will find that the mental commentary that argues and complains about something going on that shouldn't be going on, but it is the cause. The gap between what is and what the mind says should be, or shouldn't be, that gap, is the arising of unhappiness and misery, or as the Buddha called it, suffering. It arises in the gap between the isness of things in this moment and the arguing with the isness of things in this moment, imposing a narrative on it that says, no, this should not be. I'm not talking about situations where you can take action to change them. There are certain situations where action is possible and necessary. It's fine. But even if action is possible and necessary, at this very moment, it still is as it is. Then you can take action, but this moment is as it is. When you allow this moment to be as it is because you recognize the inevitability of it, it seems so obvious. But it's not obvious to most humans. Recognize the inevitability of what is already the case now. If you can internally align yourself with this inevitable now, the next moment is a different thing. But when the next moment comes, it's now, of course. There's no next moment except as a thought in the head. Where is the future? You've never experienced it, you can't. Impossible. And yet, humans think about it more than the present moment. They want to get to the future because they don't want what is. They believe some kind of liberation or fulfillment will come next, always missing the isness of things. So, if unhappiness arises, examine, is it caused by the situation I'm in, or is it caused by how my mind is interpreting the situation? Be yourself. In the Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece, there is the inscription, know yourself. But knowing yourself is the same as being yourself, exactly the same at that level. There's nothing to know if you are present because there is no further knowing about presence. There's nothing you can know about presence, you can only be present. So, to know yourself at a deeper level means to be present, and to know yourself as presence. There's another level to knowing yourself, 2 levels in fact. One is knowing your own ego, recognizing your ego when it happens and observing it. Then, you know yourself on that level. At a deeper level, knowing yourself as being yourself. That is, being the presence. Both levels go together. If you're not the presence, then there isn't enough presence in you to observe the ego. You need presence because only presence allows you to recognize your own ego. In recognizing the ego, it dissolves. All of the patterns become harmless. You are no longer possessed by them. Let's say you look good, and you like to dress nicely, there's nothing wrong with that. But do you derive your entire or a large part of your sense of who you are from that? If yes, then you are in the grip of ego. Or are you simply enjoying looking good? If you look nice, why not enjoy it while you can? There can still be a superficial enjoyment in that as long as you remain rooted at a deeper level. You can enjoy certain things on the surface level without being completely trapped by them, so they no longer constitute the foundation for your sense of self. You know full well, okay, I look nice now. I'll make the most of it because I know what time will do to the physical form. The same applies to possessions. If you have something you enjoy, why not enjoy it? But do you derive your sense of who you are from what you have? That is a huge trap, buddy. You can enjoy an object in your possession without egoic attachment to it. There's a difference between egoic attachment and simple enjoyment. Sometimes you might not know whether you have egoic attachment or simple enjoyment until you lose the thing. For example, if your car is scratched or stolen, here's your opportunity to find out what kind of relationship you had with it. If there was egoic attachment, you'll suffer, you'll feel upset, angry, or even devastated. If there wasn't, you'll feel little more than mild inconvenience. When there's no egoic attachment to things, you're also less likely to accumulate unnecessary possessions. When ego is at play, possessions serve only to satisfy a permanent sense of lack that defines the ego. This is why some people develop an addiction to shopping. The difference lies in appreciating something without attaching your sense of self to it. For example, an expensive watch can be appreciated for its craftsmanship. It's beautifully made, and it works well. You take care of it, but you don't possess it in an egoic sense. A famous watch advertisement puts it well. You never actually own this watch, you merely look after it for the next generation. While it's a clever marketing line, it carries a spiritual truth. Personally, I've found that I'm not very drawn to buying things. Shopping doesn't appeal to me. But I do have a personal appreciation for mechanical watches. There's something about the meticulous craftsmanship, the attention and care that goes into creating them. This quality, when someone gives complete attention to what they're making, imbues the object with a certain energy. It doesn't have to be a watch. It could be a meal prepared with care, or an artifact created with love. When something is made with true care and attention, it carries a unique energy, a sense of quality that you can feel and appreciate. Even in everyday life, this attention and presence can transform the simplest of tasks into something meaningful and fulfilling. 4. Success loves silence, not because it's secretive or mysterious, but because it needs time and space to grow. Success, like a seed, begins quietly beneath the soil. It doesn't announce itself to the world. It doesn't demand attention or validation. It simply works steadily and silently until one day it emerges tall and strong for all to see. And yet, so many of us feel compelled to tell the world what we're doing, what we're planning, and how we're going to get there. Why is that? Maybe it's a need for recognition or approval. Maybe it's the thrill of saying, "Look at me, I'm on my way." But here's the problem. The more you talk about your plans, the less energy you have to actually execute them. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? Sharing too much can drain the very momentum you need to succeed. In my years of business and personal development, I've seen this play out time and time again. People with grand ideas and noble ambitions, ideas that could change their lives, talk themselves out of the very thing they set out to do. How? By telling too many people too soon. They expose their dreams to the cold winds of doubt, criticism, and distraction. Before they know it, The fire they once felt has burned out. So today, I want to share with you the philosophy of keeping your plans close to your chest, not out of secrecy, but out of wisdom. We'll explore how to cultivate a mindset that values action over words, focus over fanfare, and results over recognition. Because at the end of the day, it's not what you say you'll do that matters. It's what you actually accomplish. Keeping your plans to yourself can be so powerful. There's a subtle relationship between intention and action. Think about it. Every time you share your intentions, your goals, your dreams, your plans with others, you're releasing a bit of that energy. You're giving away a part of the fire that fuels your actions. In many cases, that fire is better kept contained, stoked in the quiet of your own mind, rather than exposed to the world too soon. One reason is simple. When you tell people what you're going to do, you create an illusion of progress. You say, "I'm starting a new business," or "I'm going to lose 20 pounds," and the people around you nod and smile, maybe even clap their hands in encouragement. It feels good, doesn't it? That sense of approval, that validation. But here's the danger. The mind can mistake that approval for accomplishment. You haven't actually done anything yet, but you've already tasted a little bit of the reward. And what happens next? The urgency to act diminishes. The fire cools. The dream that once seemed so vivid, so full of possibility, starts to feel like something you've already achieved in your mind. So you settle into a state of comfort, and the action, the real difficult work that makes the dream a reality, gets postponed. This is how dreams die, in the cradle of good intentions. Now, some might say, isn't it good to share your plans? Doesn't it keep you accountable? Well, accountability has its place, but only with the right people and at the right time. You see, not everyone who listens to your plans will understand them. Some will question your motives or doubt your abilities. They might not say it out loud, but their skepticism will hang in the air like a shadow over your ambition. And if you're not careful, that shadow can creep into your own thinking. Suddenly, you're second-guessing yourself. You're wondering if they're right, if maybe your idea isn't as good as you thought it was. Now, I'm not saying you should never share your ideas. No, that's not the point. The point is to share selectively, thoughtfully, and only when the time is right. You need to protect your vision in its early stages, like a gardener protecting young plants from frost. Share your plans with people who will nurture them, not trample on them. Seek out mentors or close friends who genuinely want to see you succeed. But even then, keep the details to a minimum. Don't let your ideas become a spectacle before they've had a chance to grow. Here's another thing to consider: the element of surprise. There's a certain power in doing the unexpected, in letting your results speak for themselves. Imagine this. You've been quietly working on a project for months, maybe even years. You haven't said a word about it to anyone outside your trusted circle. And then one day you unveil it to the world, a finished product, a completed goal, a shining achievement. The impact is far greater than if you've been talking about it the whole time, dropping hints and previews along the way. People will marvel at what you've accomplished because it came out of nowhere. It's a reminder that action is always more impressive than words. Years ago, I knew a young man who wanted to start his own business. He was full of ideas and enthusiasm, and he couldn't wait to tell everyone about it. At every opportunity, he'd go on and on about his plans, what he was going to do, how successful he was going to be, how his life was about to change. People listened politely, but over time they started to grow skeptical. Why? Because months went by, and nothing happened. The more he talked, the less people believed in him, and eventually, he stopped believing in himself. Contrast that with another man I knew, a farmer from the Midwest. He had a vision to turn his small family farm into a thriving enterprise. But instead of talking about it, he simply got to work. He read books, studied successful farmers, and quietly implemented new techniques. He didn't announce his plans. He let his results do the talking. When the time came to sell his crops, he shocked everyone with the quality and quantity of his harvest. People asked, "How did you do it?" And he simply smiled and said, "By working when no one was watching." You see, there's a lesson in that. The less you talk, the more time and energy you have to act. The less you seek validation, the more confidence you build within yourself. And the less you share your plans prematurely, the more control you have over your own narrative. It's not about secrecy, it's about strategy. It's about knowing that your dreams are worth protecting, and that your actions will always speak louder than your words. How many times have you shared a plan or a goal with someone, only to feel the motivation slip away afterward? How many times have you let the opinions of others influence your path? These are important questions because they reveal how much power we give away when we speak too soon. But the good news is, you can take that power back. You can choose to focus on action, to guard your dreams, and to let your success be the thing that speaks for you. The world is full of noise, isn't it? Opinions, distractions, unsolicited advice, they're everywhere. And when you start sharing your dreams too freely, you're inviting that noise into your life. You're opening the door to criticism, doubt, and even envy. These are forces that can derail even the best laid plans if you're not careful. Think about it. When you tell someone about your big idea, how often do they respond with genuine enthusiasm and support? Sometimes they do. But often people respond with caution, skepticism, or even subtle discouragement. They might say, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Or "That sounds risky," or "I knew someone who tried that and failed." These comments might seem harmless, but they can plant seeds of doubt in your mind. And doubt is a dangerous thing. It can grow quickly and choke the roots of your ambition. But it's not just the doubters you need to watch out for. There are also the envious, the people who resent your ambition, because it reminds them of what they haven't accomplished. They might not say it outright, but their subtle negativity can drain your energy just the same. And then there are the well-meaning advisors, the ones who genuinely want to help but end up confusing you with conflicting opinions and unsolicited suggestions. All of this noise can pull you away from your original vision, leaving you scattered and uncertain. That's why discretion is so powerful. When you keep your plans to yourself, you're protecting your focus. You're creating a quiet space where your ideas can grow free from the interference of others. It's like building a greenhouse for your dreams, a place where they can flourish in the right conditions until they're strong enough to face the elements. It's important to start building momentum. Momentum is a precious thing. It's the forward motion you create when you take consistent, purposeful action toward your goals. And here's the key. Momentum thrives in silence. When you're focused on doing the work rather than talking about the work, you build a rhythm. Each small step you take reinforces the next, and before you know it, you've made significant progress. But when you start talking about your plans prematurely, you disrupt that rhythm. You shift your focus from action to explanation, from doing to justifying. And every moment you spend explaining yourself is a moment you're not moving forward. It's like trying to drive a car while constantly stopping to show people where you're going. You lose speed. And worse, you lose the sense of purpose that comes from staying in motion. I want to share another story with you, one that illustrates the power of momentum and discretion. There was a friend of mine who decided to write a book. It was a lifelong dream, and he was determined to make it happen. But instead of announcing his plans to the world, he quietly set a goal: to write 500 words a day, every day, until the book was finished. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing, not even his closest friends. He just worked, day after day, in silence. Months later, he finally shared it with a small circle of trusted people. Their reaction? Pure admiration. They were amazed at what he had accomplished, not just because the book was good, but because he had done it without seeking attention or validation. And when the book was published, it was a success not because of any grand announcements, but because the work spoke for itself. Now let me tell you about another friend of mine, someone who was equally passionate about writing. But instead of getting to work, he spent months talking about his plans. He'd call with updates, share outlines, and ask for opinions on every little detail. The more he talked, the less he wrote. And eventually, the project fizzled out. Why? Because he spent all his energy seeking approval instead of building momentum. There's a powerful lesson in these two stories. Action breeds confidence, while too much talking breeds hesitation. When you take consistent action, even in small doses, you prove to yourself that you're capable. You build a track record, a sense of accomplishment that fuels your progress. But when you talk too much, you get stuck in the realm of possibilities, what could be, what might be, without ever crossing the bridge to reality. Here's the thing. Some people worry that keeping their plans private makes them seem secretive or aloof. But here's the truth. Discretion isn't about shutting people out. It's about preserving your focus. It's about recognizing that your dreams are precious, and that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your journey. Think of it this way. When you're planting a garden, you don't invite the whole neighborhood to walk through the soil before the seeds have sprouted. You protect the ground, you water it carefully, and you wait until the first shoots appear. Only then do you invite others to admire the fruits of your labor. The same principle applies to your goals. By keeping them private, you're not being secretive. You're being strategic. You're giving yourself the space to grow, to learn, and to adapt without the pressure of external expectations. And when the time comes to share your success, it will be all the more powerful because it's backed by real results. So here's a challenge for you. The next time you set a goal, resist the urge to announce it to the world. Instead, channel that energy into action. Write it down, make a plan, and take the first step quietly, deliberately, and with full focus. Remember, the goal isn't to impress others with your intentions. It's to impress yourself with your accomplishments. There's something profoundly liberating about moving in silence. It frees you from the weight of external expectations and allows you to operate on your own terms. Think about it. When you announce your plans to the world, you're putting yourself under a spotlight. Suddenly, people are watching, waiting, and maybe even judging. That pressure can be stifling, especially in the early stages of a project when things are still uncertain and fluid. You see, success is rarely a straight line. It's a journey of trial and error, of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And when you're under the public eye, those setbacks can feel magnified. Every misstep becomes a potential point of criticism. Every delay, a source of scrutiny. But when you keep your plans private, you give yourself the freedom to fail quietly, to learn from your mistakes without the added burden of outside opinions. This is why discretion isn't just a strategy. It's a gift you give to yourself. It's a way of creating a safe space where you can experiment, grow, and refine your ideas without distraction. And here's the beautiful thing. When you're not seeking approval or validation, you become more connected to your own instincts. You start to trust yourself more deeply, to rely on your own judgment rather than the opinions of others. I know what you're thinking. Isn't feedback important? Don't I need input from others to make my ideas better? And the answer is yes, feedback is invaluable. But it has to come at the right time and from the right people. Not everyone is qualified to give you constructive input, and not every stage of your journey is the right time to seek it. Early on, when your vision is still taking shape, it's better to focus on the work itself. Once you've made progress, once you've built something tangible, that's the time to invite feedback from people you trust and respect. I once worked with a man who was incredibly gifted at spotting opportunities. He had a knack for seeing potential where others saw obstacles. But he had one fatal flaw. He couldn't stop talking about his ideas. Every time he came up with a new concept, he'd rush to share it with anyone who would listen. And what happened? More often than not, someone else would act on the idea before he did. He gave away his advantage by revealing his plans too soon. Contrast that with another businessman I knew, a quiet, unassuming fellow who rarely talked about what he was working on. He wasn't flashy or boastful, but he had a remarkable ability to execute. While others were busy talking, he was busy building. And when he unveiled his work, it was always impressive, well thought out, polished, and ready for the world to see. He didn't need to announce his intentions because his results spoke louder than words ever could. This brings us to another key principle. Results are your best advertisement. When you achieve something significant, people will take notice without you having to say a word. Your success will naturally attract attention, and that attention will be far more meaningful than anything you could have generated by talking about your plans prematurely. Think of it as a ripple effect. Your actions create waves that reach far and wide, touching people in ways that words never could. But there's another reason to keep your plans private, one that's often overlooked. It has to do with the power of focus. When you share your plans with others, you're not just giving away energy, you're also inviting distractions. People will start asking questions, offering suggestions, and sharing their own ideas, which can pull you in a dozen different directions. Before you know it, you've lost sight of your original goal, and your once clear vision has become muddled. Focus is one of the most precious resources you have. It's what allows you to channel your energy toward a single point, to cut through the noise and make real progress. And the best way to protect your focus is to limit the number of people who have access to your plans. The fewer voices you have in your ear, the easier it is to stay on track. What would it look like if you applied this principle to your own life? Imagine starting a new project, a business, a creative endeavor, a personal goal, and telling no one about it. Imagine working quietly, steadily, without seeking validation or approval. What might you accomplish in that space of silence? How much further could you go without the weight of outside expectations? This is the essence of what we're talking about today. The freedom to work on your own terms, the power to let your actions speak louder than your words, and the wisdom to protect your dreams until they're ready to be shared. It's not about being secretive or aloof. It's about being intentional. It's about recognizing that your energy, your focus, and your momentum are too valuable to waste on idle chat. And when the time comes to reveal what you've been working on, when the results are there for all to see, you'll find that your success carries a weight, a substance that words alone could never convey. You'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you didn't just talk about your dreams. You made them a reality. So the idea of keeping your plans private isn't about withholding or hiding. It's about understanding the value of your energy and focus. It's about protecting the fragile beginnings of your dreams, nurturing them in silence until they're strong enough to stand on their own. It's about recognizing that action is always more powerful than words, and that results speak louder than any announcement ever could. When you choose to keep your plans to yourself, you're making a statement not to the world, but to yourself. You're saying, I trust my ability to see this through. I don't need applause to get started, and I don't need permission to pursue my goals. That kind of confidence is rare, and it's incredibly powerful. It gives you the freedom to act without fear, to learn from your mistakes without judgment, and to grow at your own pace. And here's the beautiful part. When you succeed, you'll inspire others not by what you said you were going to do, but by what you've actually done. Your actions will become a beacon, a reminder to others that real progress comes from focus, discipline, and quiet determination. You'll show them that it's not about how loudly you proclaim your intentions. It's about how steadfastly you pursue them. So, as you move forward from here, I want to challenge you to embrace this philosophy. The next time you set a goal, resist the urge to announce it to the world. Instead, write it down, make a plan, and get to work. Let your actions do the talking, and let your results be the proof. Trust that when the time is right, the world will notice. And when they do, it will be because you've earned it. Remember, success doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a spotlight or a stage. It grows quietly, steadily, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. So guard your dreams, nurture your focus, and let your actions speak for themselves. That's the path to true success, and it's a path worth walking.